A U.S. Marine Corps F-35B is straight up missing today after its pilot ejected somewhere over southern South Carolina yesterday afternoon. Now, we still don't know why the pilot had to eject, but we do know that the aircraft was on autopilot at the time, and as a result, it's feasible that it could have flown literally hundreds of miles after the ejection. However, right now, the search is focused on the Lake Moultrie and Lake Marion areas near Charleston, South Carolina. But truth be told, that doesn't narrow things down all that much. There are more than 160,000 combined acres of lake in this vicinity, not to mention thousands more of swamp and woodlands. In other words, the DoD is looking for a very stealthy needle in a heavily wooded haystack right now. Now, as we've come to expect, there has been a ton of sensationalism, hyperbole, and even a fair bit of conspiracy floated over the past 24 hours about this mishap. So let's see if we can't sift through the static and find out what's really going on. First and foremost, you will find politicians and news outlets alike reporting that this is an $80 million aircraft that's gone missing, and that could be as much as $60 million off. The sticker price for an F-35A is around $80 million at $79.8 million. However, we're talking about a short takeoff vertical landing F-35B. Now, these are the aircraft primarily operated by the U.S. Marine Corps, and according to the government, their sticker price is about $101.3 million each, but according to the Project on Government Oversight, that price is actually closer to $140 million a piece. Now, why are they so much more expensive? Well, unlike the F-35A, which takes off and lands from regular, well-manicured runways, the F-35B has a lifting fan behind the cockpit that's connected to its single turbofan engine via a drive shaft. When engaged, this allows the aircraft to land vertically and to hover, and when not carrying a full payload, can even take off vertically in a pinch. All of that adds weight and cost to this aircraft. Now, how do you lose an F-35? Well, you may not be all that surprised to know that stealth fighters like this are designed to be pretty tough to keep tabs on, but there are a number of things done to make sure we don't lose them during exercises like this that all seem to have gone wrong yesterday. First and foremost, every aircraft flies with a transponder on board that can respond to ground radar stations as well as some satellites with information like the aircraft's identification number, its heading, its rate of speed, and its altitude, among some other things. Now, it's not uncommon for military pilots to turn their transponders off during combat operations and some combat exercises, but to do that over the United States requires FAA approval. And according to a DoD spokesperson, the transponder in this F-35B was not turned off intentionally, but it was malfunctioning, which is the reason why we didn't immediately know where this aircraft ended up. Beyond that, we're down to radar tracking, and it may not surprise you to learn that tracking these aircraft on radar can be a pretty tough undertaking. Stealth fighters like the F-35 are designed specifically to be extremely difficult to detect or target via high-frequency targeting air defense radar arrays, though they can sometimes produce a resonance against lower-frequency arrays like those used by air traffic control, weather tracking stations, and some early warning air defense radars. However, producing that resonance is not a sure thing. It's based on the angle of observation and a ton of other variables that can't be counted on. In other words, this can sometimes alert air defenders to the fact that there's a stealth aircraft operating somewhere in their area, but it isn't reliable as a means of really tracking an aircraft's trajectory. Beyond that, stealth fighters like the F-35 regularly fly with radar reflectors called Lunenburg lenses installed. Now, what these do is produce such a prominent radar return that it renders these aircraft very easy to track on radar. Now, that's really useful when it comes to flying across country where you want to make sure you don't crash into any other aircraft, and it also can prevent adversary nations from getting a look at your real radar profile. Instead, they're just going to see the big blip produced by these Lunenburg lenses. However, the F-35Bs that were operating yesterday were not flying with these lenses on. In other words, these aircraft were flying in a pretty stealth profile and relying on their transponders for aviation safety. And when something went wrong, the same malfunction feasibly could have made the transponder go offline that made the pilot eject. Well, then we no longer have an effective means of tracking this aircraft very precisely. Now, from there, we need to consider where the aircraft could have ended up after the pilot ejected. Usually, pilots don't have their aircraft on autopilot when they eject because they're concerned about the aircraft potentially going on and crashing into a populated area. Instead, you point the nose toward a safe space and you punch out. Why exactly this pilot ejected with the aircraft on autopilot is still a mystery to us, though it may not be to the Marine Corps. They may have just not released this information. Eventually, they will produce a full investigation that they will release to the public. And as for an aircraft flying for hundreds of miles after a pilot ejects, that's not even unheard of. In fact, one of the most famous happened in 1970 in an incident that's now regularly called the Cornfield Bomber, even though it was an F-106 Delta Dart fighter that it happened to. That pilot, First Lieutenant Gary Faust, ejected when his aircraft went into what he believed to be an unrecoverable spin. But after he ejected, the shift in weight due to the pilot, ejection seat, and cockpit canopy no longer being on board helped the aircraft go into a dive, which then aerodynamically allowed it to stabilize and level out. It flew on for about 50 miles before coming to a gentle belly landing in a cornfield in Montana. It was repaired and eventually returned to service. Now, that doesn't mean it's very likely that we'll be able to recover and repair this missing F-35B. Chances are good that it went down somewhere in one of these lakes or another body of water, and it will be very tough to find. At the end of the day, this whole situation shines a light on one of the most common misconceptions about the US military. People like to think it's this omnipresent governing body with satellites looking at every square inch of the earth at all times and incredible technologies that we can't yet even imagine. When in reality, the US military is comprised of more than 1 million everyday people like you and me doing their best with the resources that they have. Satellites can't see everything all the time, and stealth aircraft are, surprise, surprise, pretty sneaky. So what do I think happened to this missing F-35? Well, right now I want to remind you that we should all be careful not to draw conclusions until more information has been forthcoming. But right now it seems pretty likely to me that some sort of serious system malfunction on board affected the transponder and the autopilot and led the pilot to believe that he or she could not regain control of the aircraft, forcing them to eject just as they were trained to do. At the end of the day, even if this is a $140 million aircraft, we can always build another one. But that pilot's family, I'm sure, is relieved to know that the pilot landed safely in a South Carolina neighborhood. And while we'll keep looking for the crashed aircraft, we're not down a pilot today, and that in itself is a good thing.